Okay, so we've done all of our decals, we've got all the designs on our camera. Hopefully yours is a little bit more finished and detailed than this one. Now what we're going to do is to have a look at the rendering part. So we know what rendering is now through our lesson, and you've got some different options here of all the different things that you can do. At the moment we're just going to look at render. So render is basically to give it a realistic finish, and it's looking at textures, colours and surface finishes to give a realistic indication of what it's going to look like. Okay, so here you can see I've got my kind of render stuck in a field for some reason. Yours might not come up like this. We're going to have a look at applying different materials to it. So most of it is through this, what looks like a beach ball, I guess, that says appearance. If you click that, you can then select different parts, and you've got two options. You can either attach it to bodies and components, or you can attach it to faces. So if we do bodies and components first, then if you scroll down, you've got a range of different folders that you can choose from. Okay, it's quite fun experimenting, but obviously for this we want to give it a realistic view. For this one, let's have a look at metals, and I'm going to go into aluminium. So we've got a range of different options here, different colours and different types. So I'm going to go to a satin aluminium. And what you do, you simply drag it onto the product. Okay. Now, if you remember from before, when we did our lens, the lens is a separate component. So it's not selecting that one because we're looking at different bodies and components. The rest of the camera, the way I've drawn it at the moment, is all one body. Okay. So let's have a look at putting another material in for the lens. So the lens, we might want to do glass, for instance, which I think is under other. Okay, and then in there we've got emissive, which is things like lights, so that might be quite nice for the flash. Okay, or there's things like environment, which is you've got air, concrete, all those kinds of things. Okay. The only problem with putting a glass on is obviously it makes it see-through, so you might want to choose something else. Even putting a decal of a lens on the front can sometimes look quite cool. Okay, let's just do a plastic for the time being. We'll do a translucent plastic, which means it's slightly see-through. And I'm going to do a slightly bluey coloured lens, and I'll show you what to do with this in a second. Okay, so you've got your basic parts on there. You might decide though that, you know what, I wanted a plastic on here, but it's not quite got the colour that I want. At the top now, you've got a range of the materials that are used in your design. If you right click it, you can edit most of them. Okay, so I might say, actually, you know what, my lens is more of that kind of colour. And you can hit done, and it will save it to that one. A lot of these you can change in that way, so you can change the metals, you can change the woods and so on. Okay, so there I've got my camera. It's looking okay. What I might just do is do a different one for the button to show you how to do it for faces. So if I go to, let's have a look, another type of metal possibly, or paint. Let's choose any of these just for the time being. I'm going to go for a glossy paint, and just to make it stand out, I'm going to choose the red enamel paint. But what I need to make sure that I do is that it selects faces, so I can just drag it onto that face. There's the one I wanted, and now you can see I can select different faces of my design. Now, depending on how it's drawn, it might take a little while to select all of the faces and do it in that way. I might keep the top as it is. I'll make it red. There you go. So we can zoom out, we can spin it around. Okay, so that already looks quite good, but we might want it to look a little bit better. So if you go to Setup, which is the Langle Poise lamp, Setup will give you a few more options. Okay, so at the moment my background is what we call an environment. You can either have an environment or a solid colour. Generally I like solid colour, and what we're going to do later on for our our poster and our design, you might want to change that and have it a solid colour. And again, you can choose all the different colours that you've got. Okay, like so. I tend to like sort of a dark colour, so I'm going to go for that, something like so. If you choose environment, then you've got an environment library and you can choose different settings. Okay, so my camera in a field doesn't really make sense to me, so I'm going to have it as a solid colour. You've then got some options what to do with the ground. Okay, you can give it a plane, you can actually give it a ground. If you don't give it a ground, then you can't have things like reflections and so on. Okay, so you've got a few different options there, and you can make the shadow or the reflection kind of more or less kind of rough or shiny. Okay, and you can also change the viewing and so on if you wish. Other bits that you can play around with, like depth of field, you can focus on a certain part of the camera, so we might focus on the C of Canon, and we'll show you what that looks like in a second. And close it. Okay. The real good bit though is when you start to render it, and you can either render it in the canvas or you can just render it without. I'm going to render it in the canvas for the time being. So if you press that button, it'll start to do its magic. Now this is where it does take a little bit of time. So the in-canvas render means it will basically kind of colour it in, as you can see it's starting to do now, and it'll start to put those materials and those settings and things on, and the longer that you leave it, the better the quality will be. Okay, but it can take a while. It can take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, even longer to get it really, really good quality. So the other option that you've got is the cloud render. If you press that, it will basically send you an email when it's finished. Okay, so you can then get on with the rest of your work. Does the same kind of thing. I just prefer to kind of use this one because I quite like the look of it. Now this one then, as I say, the longer you leave it, the better it will be. I did this depth of field one on this, and the depth of field is it's like an effect where you just focus on a certain part of the camera. It's worth having a play with, but most of the time I guess we wouldn't necessarily use it. So you can approximately see what that's going to look like. I'm going to stop that for the time being. It'll go back to normal. If I go to my angle poise lamp again, I'm going to take off the depth of field, like so. So you can change things like exposure and the length of the camera and stuff like that. And this time I'm going to render it normally without. Okay, so you can play around with all these different types of settings to get a realistic render of your camera. When you've finished it, you want to hit the save button to capture the image, and then you can save it as a PNG or a JPEG, things like that, ready to put into our poster later. Okay, so have a play with the different appearances, have a play with the different settings and changing the angle of the camera and things. You know, even where it says position, you can change the angle of the camera and it will completely change the look of it. So if we take that off, okay, so you see you can change it around the shadows and so on. Do that until you get the best effect that you want. Hit render, leave it until you're happy with the final outcome, and then hit capture image. Okay, have fun with the renders.